It's my pleasure now to introduce today's speaker. And Jacie Rowe IV is a political organizer and advocate who worked with the end-of-life movement and Compassion and Choice to pass the End-of-Life Option Act. Once passed, he moved on to work with Final Exit Network to ensure everyone has access to options, whether or not they qualify for the End-of-Life Option Act. And I know that this conversation, the end of life and what we're going to do about it, can be difficult for some people. And yet here is a great opportunity for us humanists to really think about things and to take in all of the evidence with compassion and kindness to others and to ourselves, to think about how we want those days to be for ourselves and those we love. So I really appreciate that Jacie's doing this work very much, and welcome him to the stage for me.
How's everyone doing? Thank you for hosting me. It's an honor to be here. I've spoken with many humanist groups around California, so it's always a great time. And I hope that today, even though our topic is a little morbid, we can make it enjoyable. When you think about, I'm glad to have this mic. Thank you, Jim and Carl, so I can walk around a little bit. When you think about death with dignity, I want you to think about the peace of mind that comes with it. So as I go through the next 45 minutes with you, this isn't about people taking their own life. This isn't about suicide. If we were pushing legislation, you wouldn't even hear the word suicide because we don't like the connotation that's associated with that word. So we look at this as an option for those who are terminally ill when it comes to the law. Now today I'm going to discuss two different things with you. So I want you all to stay ready because it's like a Venn diagram. I want you to see how they're separate and how they're the same. Okay, but there is going to be differences. Final Exit Network is an organization that's a nonprofit, nationally based, 100% volunteer-based, I'm a volunteer myself, that works to ensure anyone who is suffering has an opportunity to end their life. And we'll go into those details. The initial part of this discussion today, we're going to talk about the End-of-Life Option Act that was signed by Governor Brown on October 5th, 2015. Okay? Everybody with me so far? Awesome. So when we think about the End-of-Life Option Act, we first have to, there's an African word that's used entitled Sankofa, and we have to think about the Sankofa effect for this bill. People who are kind of new to the act will say, oh, in 2015 you all organized a heck of a campaign and were really able to push the dial. The reality is there's been people working on this legislation longer than I've been alive. Truly. There's some stalwarts and giants in this movement that were fighting for death with dignity when it was the backroom conversation you had after Thanksgiving dinner with one or two of your cousins and made sure nobody was around during the conversation. People were afraid. People were afraid to be called names or ostracized in their community. Good thing we're not in a Catholic room or we'd be excommunicated, right? People were afraid. And with the conversation started by Derek Humphrey, the people in Compassionate Choices, the people with the organization called Death with Dying that existed before even Compassionate Choices and Final Exit Network. These people pushed the conversation. They opened up the door for all of us to now think about how we are living and how we're dying. Okay? In 2015, there was a Gallup poll that came out in July, and the question was, how many Californians support the End-of-Life Option Act or the ability to end their life if they're terminally ill? And for the first time in 30 years, a majority of Californians supported this idea at 54%. Well, when that poll came out, Compassionate Choices said, how can we figure out how to use this poll even more? So they decided to tweak the questions a little bit, and they asked doctors, would doctors support the law, not for the public, but for themselves? Well, you'd be surprised. Well, you're probably not surprised because the poll's 2 years old now, but you would have been surprised to know that over 70% of doctors supported the End-of-Life Option Act for themselves. Now, this was totally counterintuitive to the message that was being presented by the California Medical Association. So now we had to do a little bit more research. We find out what the California Medical Association, is anybody in the California Medical Association represented here? Okay, well that doesn't surprise me. 22% of California doctors are actually in the California Medical Association. So they don't represent a majority, or 70% I will call as a mandate, them having the power to really express what doctors' opinions are. 22% is like a group of friends. And with that, we were able to target the other 78% of doctors and bring them to the table. Now, we have one doctor in the California Senate out of all of the senators. So there's 40 senators, 80 representatives, one doctor, Senator Richard Pan. And he's actually a senator for Sacramento. He's a Democrat. Now, he wasn't supportive at the time of the End-of-Life Option Act. And while we wanted him to be a yes vote, from a compassionate choices perspective, making him neutral was a victory. Now, why would he become neutral? Right? Most people, if they're against it for religious reasons or other, and there's not a lot of gray area where people want to negotiate. But as a doctor, we pretty much created a tension between the doctors where he had to go neutral, and I'll explain that here in a second. So the California Medical Association met April 20th, 2015. Now in this discussion, the board was all together, and some doctors were adamantly against the law, the bill. Look, we're not supporting it. Do no harm is a Hippocrates core or creed, and we're going to stick to that. We won't harm our patients. Let God or whoever kill them the way that they need to die. I mean, literally, this is how the language was shaped. And then these other doctors would say, where is your compassion? Have you not been in the doctor's office with patients over the last 30 years? Have you not sat with somebody dying of cancer, glioblastoma, liver disease? Have you not witnessed the sufferings that come with these terminal illnesses? Have you not watched people like my grandmother spend 5 years with her body debilitating, even though she's not conscious for 4 out of 5 of them? Have you been present? Or were you just a doctor by trade sitting in somebody's office doing research and publishing papers? We have to ask these real questions because there are people dying in the state of California, and you're pretending like there's nothing we can do about it. Well, in Oregon, there's a law been around since '96, and it hasn't worked. There's been a lot of abuses. Children have found the medication, and they've taken it, and children have died because of this medication. You don't have to lie. There's no instances of abuse. And that's what made the Oregon law such a foundation for the California law. So 98% of the California law was written based on the Oregon law. So if you know the Oregon law, you'll learn this law, but if you don't, it doesn't matter because I'm going to teach you today. Okay? So the California law says a person has to have a terminal illness affirmed by 2 doctors. So what they call your general doctor and your consulting doctor. You have to have your doctors approve that, basically stating you have a terminal illness 15 days apart. So about 2 weeks. So your first doctor says, using myself as an example, Jacie, we're sorry to tell you, you've developed this type of cancer. You have less than 6 months to live. Well, most people anyway will say, I need a second opinion, right? Pretty smart. So when you go to your consulting doctor for the second opinion, the consulting doctor affirms that you have less than 6 months to live. Now you qualify for the medication. Okay? For the most part, you all living in San Jose, you won't have a problem. You're dealing with Kaiser or Blue Anthem insurance. You're going to have a very easy time accessing the medication and finding doctors to both approve if you find yourself terminally ill. If you're in places like Palm Desert where 320,000 seniors over 65 live, and they have 3 medical facilities, none of which serve the End of Life Option Act. They have to drive to Los Angeles to find a doctor. It's a little bit more of a burden. Now, according to the law, if your hospital doesn't have a doctor that will work with you because of the hospital being a religious hospital, or the doctor having his own religious preference, which according to the law they're allowed to opt out, and so they don't have to serve patients, the hospital is required, keyword, required, to send you by helicopter to a hospital that can serve this need. Now, this has not happened because the law's only been in place about 1 year and 4 months, so we haven't witnessed this play out. But it is written into the paperwork that if one hospital doesn't serve you, another hospital has. This is your right now, according to the state of California. Okay? So that's the key part to remember. Now, why does the law become irrelevant for some people? The way I like to describe the law, even when we were working on the legislation in 2015, I describe it as like that old pair of pants that was once your favorite pair of pants, and you can pull it up all the way to the thighs, but you just can't get the button across. Okay, this is the End of Life Option Act. The button that we can't get across is Alzheimer's, right, is MS. Any disease that has a debilitating effect on the human body that takes longer than 6 months to end the life of the person. If you're suffering from this type of illness or disease, you do not qualify for the End of Life Option Act, no matter what. This is why Final Exit Network is important. Final Exit Network decided in the late 80s, early 90s, that people had a right to self-determination. People had a right to choose, just like the state of Montana did through the Supreme Court when they decided to legalize death with dignity, that people have a right to choose what happens to their existence. That no, I can't influence you, Arthur, and you don't have a right to tell me that I can't do what I want with this gift of mine. This is mine, right? Autonomy is the word when we did the Gallup poll, and 94% of people said they believed in death with dignity simply because of the autonomy they had over their body. Now that kind of confused me because I grew up in a military atmosphere, so we were moving a lot, and I'm used to people having autonomy when they go to the hospital. But in the state of California, you all didn't receive autonomy from your hospitals until 2007. They literally had to pass a law in Sacramento saying, Arthur or Elaine, you have a right to tell the doctor what you want to do with your body. Before 2007, if you went to the doctor, Sid, and you said, hey, give me a checkup, see what's wrong with me. And the doctor says, hey, Sid, I think you have a stomach issue here, but we have a special experimental medication that would be perfect for you, and your insurance will cover it. That was your option, whatever the doctor spoke. You didn't have an option to say, well, is there another medication that I can take for my stomach? Or is there maybe an alternative medication that I can take? You had to accept whatever initial option your doctor said. So only for about 10 years, if you think about that, have Californians had autonomy in having a conversation with their doctor. That's why the California Medical Association personifies itself to be a lot mightier than it actually is in the state. But the people have the power because of that law. And so now, the power has shifted even more into your hands, where you can tell your doctor, hey, I'd like to try the experimental medication. Or, have you looked at my 5 wishes? Now let's tangent for a second, and we'll do a quick survey in the room. How many of you are familiar with the 5 wishes document? One hand in the back. Okay. If you have a pen and paper or a sharp memory, I need you to write this down right now. Okay, 5 wishes. You can go home and Google it. It's about a 7-page document in which you express your will upon dying for the doctors. So this is what medications you would like to receive or not like to receive. If you're suffering and you want to refuse water and fluids and food. You have a right to refuse fluids and food. If you're looking at palliative care or palliative sedation, you want to express that in your 5 wishes. For certain people to visit you when you're in a hospital, you express that in your 5 wishes. Now this is in addition to your pink sheet. How many of you all are familiar with the pink sheet? Pulse. It's a physician's order, life-sustaining treatment. Okay, another one. I'm going to have to email you these documents, Arthur, so you can make sure your group has them. Because we have to be prepared, right? And I love that you all are here, because this means you need to be here. So the POST, or the pink sheet, again, write this down if you haven't, POLST. That's an acronym for Physician's Order Life-Sustaining Treatment. This is a sheet you fill out and you put on your refrigerator. So if something happens and EMS runs in and there's some 22-year-old that doesn't know anything, they read this and discover what your will is. Carl, Jim, this is how you get them to know what's going on. And when you put it on the refrigerator, some people go as further and they'll get a bracelet, a do not resuscitate bracelet, DNR. There's another sheet for that. If some people say, if I pass out, do not resuscitate my body. Let me go on. Let me die. That's okay. But you want to have these things listed, whether it's a DNR bracelet, a DNR necklace, your physician's order life-sustaining treatment, the pink sheet, whether you remember POST or pink sheet, it's okay. You can Google either one. And your 5 wishes. And I'm going to send Arthur all of these documents to make sure you all have them. But it's your job and your responsibility to not only fill these documents out, but share them with your doctors immediately.
Why don't you pass out the form?
It's easier to send it in the PDF than to print and travel with all of the documents. It is. And if you all have email, they can send it to you on PDF. You can fill it out right there. And then you can email it to your doctor. So just try to keep everything environmentally friendly. But the post can be a little longer as well. So it could be 2 pages, the pink sheet, but the actual documentation that goes along with it, sometimes that can add up to 20 or 30 pages. And so the PDFs is easier for people to manage and handle than the actual physical forms. But I will send them to your organizer to share with you all. Okay. Now getting back to Final Exit Network. So let's presume you all have all these things in place, but you still don't receive a 6-month diagnosis by your doctor. What do? This is when you contact our organization. And at 30 years old, I just turned 30 a couple months ago, I'm a member of Final Exit Network. Why? Because I don't know what happens tomorrow. I can drive back to LA, get hit by a bus, and end up in somebody's hospital. Final Exit Network knows what to do with my body. They're prepared because I'm prepared. My 5 wishes is filled out. My pulse is filled out. I'm the type of person where if my body is suffering in a way where I can't enjoy my full autonomy, I don't want to be resuscitated. And I've let the organization know that as well. And so you all have to recognize that Final Exit Network is an organization that can handle your death, but more so will be able to have the conversation with you and your family members. And so why would you come to us? You will come to us because your doctor says you don't qualify, but you are suffering. And some people, unfortunately, suffer from psychological things where they're not necessarily mentally ill, but they're not necessarily dying from a physical ailment. Chronic depression, chronic pain. Some people do chronic pain also have opiate allergies, so they're not able to take certain pain relievers. With Final Exit Network, if you have chronic pain for any reason, our doctors would consider supporting you and ending your life. If you have chronic depression, our doctors would consider supporting you and ending your life. Now there's a process, just like with just like with Compassionate Choices Law, where you have to apply, talk to your doctor, wait 15 days, talk to another doctor. With our organization, you become a member of our organization. That allows for some legal protections when you're a member. Then one of our coordinators would contact you within a couple of days. We'll ask you your medical history, might even request a few documents from your medical file. Our doctors will then evaluate to see if you qualify based on your medical history and your current state. At the moment they tell you you qualify, one of our coordinators will pay you a house visit and will basically teach or educate you on the process of ending your life. And we have a couple of methods that we support, but you have to do it. It's the same way with the law. It's your autonomy. And so we'll show you the method. We'll go through the process with you, but at the end of the day, you have to end your life, or else it's assisted suicide, which is, again, a phrase that I don't even like to use. Now, with the Compassion Choices bill, it's the same thing. Once they prescribe the prescription to you, there's about 30 pills that, believe it or not, 10 years ago, this was just a sleeping medication you can buy at Walgreens for $15. And now these pills will be mixed into a cup, a lot like the one you're holding. There has 6 to 8 ounces of water or juice. You mix all 30 pills together. The person digests it on their own. Now, if you're a paraplegic or you're not able to move your hands or you don't have them for whatever reason, you could use a straw to ingest it, but you still have to use your autonomy to ingest the medication. Nobody could feed it to you. That would be considered them assisting in your suicide. Okay. Now, once you ingest the medication, it can take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours for your body to pass its last breath and for you to die. So far in California, there's been a couple of hundred applications. Maybe a third of that have actually utilized the End of Life Option Act, and in a year and a half's time, no abuses. So we have to be appreciative of that. And with California, they expect an initial bump within the first 2 or 3 years because people have been waiting on this law for a long time. But then I feel like it'll balance out just like the Oregon law. So with Oregon, less than 2,000 people have even applied since 1996. So when you talk about over 20 years, that's not a lot of people applying every year. Now granted, their population is a little less than ours. So going back into Final Exit Network, so once you qualify, you don't have to end your life at that moment, right? So our organization, you can be a part of it for the next 50 years like I hope to do, right? And in 50 years, I'll call them for another assessment, give them my medical records, and then I'm allowed to go through the process myself. Now, the benefits to being part of Final Exit Network is that you stay up to date with this issue nationally, which can be hard to stay up to date on any issue nationally with all the issues we have nationally right now. But we make sure that you have a quarterly magazine that comes out, and then we make sure that you can talk to a California coordinator or wherever you are coordinating your state regularly. Another benefit of being part of Final Exit Network is that because we're a national organization, let's say you vacation in Florida, hoping Florida's still around to vacation in. Let's say you vacation in Florida or Maine or wherever, we'll work with you in those states as well. So Jim, let's say you qualify today. You call the organization, you join, we go through your medical files, everything's set. But you're like, I'm not ready to go. I'm enjoying my life, I'm feeling good, still have more golfing to do, want to go watch the play Hamilton, just want to enjoy my life a little bit. You wait 6 years, 7 years. You're in Florida, and then you just notice that you're slowing down, your energy's not the same, your body's starting to debilitate, hopefully not, but for the sake of this conversation, from whatever is harming you, and you're like, I'm ready to go. Our people will come to Florida. We'll meet you exactly where you are. Our organization can work with you whether you're in hospice, we can work with you at your house. Now, most people join our organization to die at home, honestly. That's where people are comfortable. And it's very American. I mean, before World War II, if a person was terminally ill, you called the doctor came to your house, they would do a quick assessment, hopefully not too quick, because we want them to be thorough, but they would do their assessment, and then they would let you know, hey, Grandpa Bob's probably got a week or two. So make sure y'all show some love and enjoy these last couple of days. And maybe the whole family come together and cooking Bob's favorite meals, and he's telling stories to the kids and the grandkids, and it's really a family environment. And that's what Final Exit Network looks to recreate for people in their last moments. Whether you have a family already and we just bring everybody into the house or into the center and work with you, or we just become your family. A lot of people die alone, unfortunately. And there's a book called Bowling Alone that's translated into the dying experience in America, where people have become so isolated they're by themselves when they pass. We don't like that. Organization, like I said, we're volunteers looking to show people mercy, compassion, love, and provide the peace of mind. So if you're suffering from glioblastoma, you don't want to think about all of the pain that comes with that over the 3, 4, 5 years that it may take for the cancer to kill you. Excuse me. I'll share a couple of stories with you as we get close. I have a friend in Berkeley whose father was a famous construction worker, or architect and dog trainer. His architectural skills were known all over the world. He designed buildings in Paris, France. He designed buildings here in California. He designed buildings in New York. When he turned about 78, 79 years old, he developed a brain cancer that felt like, and this is the key part, it felt like, well, it was the equivalent of termites eating his brain cells. You imagine how termites work. They work fast, but it takes a lot of them, and they work over time. It felt like with every bite, somebody took a hammer and was just beating him in the brain. And he felt every one. He went to the doctor. The doctor said it would take him at least 7 years for the termites to eat his brain away where he will die. Being an architect, having the genius to do it, he decided to try to build some sort of box, very similar to this podium, that he could put around his head, walk into the forest, take a 12-gauge shotgun, and end his life, blow his brains out. That, he described, would have been less painful than the termites and the hammers beating on his brain. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to build a box strong enough to withhold the shotgun blast at such a close distance. So he lived out all of those 7 years. When his daughter described the story to me, you can imagine the emotion flowing out of her heart, her eyes, her soul, for the pain that she watched her father go through. And I'm sure, as I share this story, you all are thinking about loved ones, or friends, or family members that you know that suffered unnecessarily. If you don't mind, I'd love for you all to raise your hand if you've known somebody to suffer at the end of their life unnecessarily. A couple, a few in the back, one up front. Yeah, I appreciate you all being vulnerable and sharing. It's not a pretty sight. And sometimes it takes human eyes to see that suffering before we say, okay, what are my options? What else can be done? Sadly, sometimes it takes for our mothers to suffer before we say, you know what? Is that genetic? Will that happen to me? Sometimes it takes for children to suffer. And unfortunately, children couldn't even qualify for the law because you have to be over 18. But when we see the suffering, I think we can all agree that suffering is an unnecessary experience in humanity that we'd all like to see removed from the grit of the universe. This is what these organizations are fighting for, to end the suffering. Who knows what tomorrow may bring? Who knows what terminal illness may or may not attack our bodies? Who knows what accidents can happen that has us physically uncomfortable? But I do know that if any of that happens, there is a family of support with Final Exit Network, and there's a law in place where your doctor will potentially work with you to end that suffering. And that's very important. It's very important that you all internalize that you have options in California, and hopefully within the next 10 years, we'd have options all over this country for people with a terminal illness. Compassionate Choices have been fighting in places like Colorado, where they just passed a law. Washington, D.C., municipal, just passed a law. It's always weird when the city passes something, but Congress can't get their stuff together. But they're working on the national law as well. Now, the interesting thing about California is our law has a sunset clause. And if you all are not familiar with that, that means within 10 years, the law expires, regardless. So people like me, other advocates for this law, are hoping that after 5 years, or within 3 more years, we'll be able to show the data. The data will continue to show no abuses in the state of California, and we can remove the sunset clause from ABX 215, which was the bill, if you want to look up the bill, for death with dignity. It's a very short bill. It's not hard to read. But that sunset clause currently would make that bill expire in 2026, meaning if you weren't planning on dying before 2026, which I don't think any of us are, you won't have any options according to the California state law. Okay, so again, this is where Final Exit Network and membership in the organization will protect you in one form or another, whether you qualify for the California law or not. And so I always like to share them both. Okay. Do we have any questions at the moment? We can continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Final Exit was the second one, waiting for the microphone.
Okay.
We'll have to right here. So, Final Exit is in a sort of a semi-legal to illegal status, technically, right?
No, it's a legal organization. It's a 501c3.
Yeah, I know, but if you go beyond the scope of California, what California law allows.
So it's not illegal for a person in the United States to kill themselves.
I see.
And Final Exit Network, with that law alone, is able to operate nationally. As long as our organization doesn't assist in a person ending their own life, it's totally legal. Now, in some states, like Georgia, this conversation would be illegal because the state of Georgia doesn't want its residents engaged in what they call suicidal or detrimental conversations. But in other states, we're allowed to educate. So
I see.
Yes, sir.
So it's, I mean, you know, and I assume also, you know, over the years before California passed the law, you know, with a lot of the AIDS stuff that was going on, there was stuff that was sort of not legal, but the authorities sort of overlooked it because they sort of understood, you know, through winks and nods, you know, that, you know, here is a dose of morphine that will kill all the pain under any circumstances. And if you are really, really in a lot of pain, you can take this and it will end your pain type things, you know, where, you know, what it really is a suicide or an end of life thing, but it's sort of like a not sanctioned, but everybody sort of knows what's going on type of a thing. You know, is that fair to say?
That's very fair. Well, in California and nationally, there's a few legal ways for people to end their life currently. And so I spoke of them a little bit during the presentation, but I'll go over them again really quick, and I'll see you in the back. So first, palliative care and palliative sedation, also known as comfort care, is basically what you just described. It's the hospice or the doctors making a person comfortable using tools like morphine to numb the pain. Everybody knows when there's too much morphine, but we don't speak about that in the public space. So when I did my first farmer's market. It was actually at Half Moon Bay. I was collecting signatures for the Death with Dignity movement. A female doctor approached me. She said, I've been a doctor since 1984, and I've been serving people morphine since 1984, helping them to end their life. She says it's not something that we talk about. It's not something that's so-called legal, but people request it all the time. All the time, up to the point of the week before she seen me at that farmer's market, she had just given somebody just a little too much morphine. And that's what ended their suffering, but also happened to end their life. Another way is refusal of food and water. Right? You have a right to refuse food and water. That can take sometimes 2 weeks minimum. A woman named Murder Zola back out in San Francisco, she actually did it in 2014. It took her body 40 days before she went to the permanent sleep. She died. And that can be a little traumatizing for the family members around, although they say refusing food and water can be euphoric and in your last moments. Another way is just refusal to take the medication. You can refuse all medication when your doctor offers it. And again, that can take a little time, but that's a way that people opt to end their life currently. So when you think about the End of Life Option Act, that's why we named it that when we wrote it. It's just another option that people have when they're talking to their doctor. Because right now, anybody, whether you're in California, Oregon, or next door in Nevada, you can tell your doctor, hey, I don't want to eat anything or drink anything for a month and just let my body waste away. And your doctor has to accept that, right? Or you can refuse medication, your doctor has to accept that. Or you can request morphine. But because some people are morphine resistant or opiate resistant, as I mentioned earlier, that can be a problem as well. And so we want people to have those options. And with the End of Life Option Act, it gives people the choice to take this medication, but then everybody can afford it. So like I said, 10 years ago, it was $15, $20 at your local Walgreens. In 2011, the price goes up to $300 because they realize that people are starting to use the fentanyl. $3,000. And now it's more than $3,000. Some places being as high as $4,800 for the prescription. Now, if your insurance covers it for you, no problem. But for those people who insurance will not cover the medication, that becomes a nice piece of change to come out of your pocket. And so with Final Exit Network, we become more financially feasible for a lot of people. Our membership is $25, $50 a month, a year for couples, right? And then the equipment itself is less than $300. And once we train you on the equipment you need, because we live in the world of Amazon and the internet, people can order the equipment themselves and walk through the process themselves. And so it becomes very feasible for somebody to end their suffering through Final Exit Network, sometimes than it is through the law that we just passed in California. And we've been doing this for 20 plus years, but like I said earlier, it's been such a secretive conversation, many people don't know. And so people like my friend's father in Berkeley, he could have contacted Final Exit Network, and 9 times out of 10, he would have been able to end his life through our organization. But without the knowledge, he suffered for all 7 of those years. And so that's why we give speeches like this. That's why I spend time with a lot of humanist organizations, Unitarian, Universalist churches, because you all, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you all are representing another 50 or 60 organizations in this room, as well as being part of Humanists. And so the way that you all branch out is the fastest way to spread positive information. At least that's been my experience over the last 2 years in California. So I'm going to go to the back and then I'll come up front. Let's get the brother in the back because I seen his hand go up earlier.
Let me remind you to hold the microphone real close to your mouth.
Directional mic.
This was a really great talk, and I thank you for being here. I just have a couple questions. The 30 pills, there's some other options that can be used, like a cyanide pill or a helium tent, which is very quick and very painless. I was wondering, what are the problems with not using those options?
So the choice of the fentanyl as a barbiturate and the seconal, that was a choice done by the doctors and the lawmakers to utilize that medication. It's actually, there's about 14 or 15 ways a person can end their life, and they get more creative the more you go down the line. Which yours are very simple, but this is the fentanyl and the seconal is the choice that the lawmakers made. Now, when you bring up the helium tent, so you're talking more about the inert gas methods. And those inert gas methods are supported by Final Exit Network and are very, very efficient. So you're talking, sometimes with that tent you brought up earlier, less than 5 minutes, as quick as 2 minutes. Very painless. If the person can end their life and end their suffering. And so that option is supported by Final Exit Network. It's not always helium because they've played with the gas concentration tanks recently. But there are other inert gas methods that will work as well.
What cyanide pills?
The cyanide pills, I don't think the state will consider those, but I've heard people talking about those when it comes to death row inmates through the injections. And that's a whole nother debate because we end horses and dogs' life one way, we end death row inmates' life another way, then humans that are just civilians going to the hospital, they have a whole nother option. You hope eventually we evolve to a place where people can just choose what works best for them. Because there's a lot of options on the table, but right now it's very regulated. So, we'll come back around to you.
I was curious about your comment when someone couldn't get the diagnosis they wanted in California and they go someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
And to quote what you said,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is just a wink-wink kind of thing. What does supporting you mean? Wink-wink, we'll give you what you want? And my second point, just very brief, is I don't see how costs for those drugs should be a big issue. Just charge it. You're not going to be around to pay.
Yeah, well, for some people that might work. Just charge us to the game, I guess, is a statement. When I said we will support you, was that what you're quoting?
Yes.
So if you don't qualify for the law through that Compassionate Choices help pass with ABX 215, Final Exit Network is another option. So we went through the 3 medical options. The End of Life Option Act through Compassionate Choices is 1 option, so that's 4. And then Final Exit is your 5th option where we can support you. And I say we, at that time representing Final Exit Network as an organization. When you join to become a member of our organization, we will talk with you, work with you through your medical history, and we will figure out if you qualify to end your life through the organization. And so that's what I meant. It wasn't a wink-wink. It was just another option that people have on the table in case they're suffering.
You specifically said go to another state. That's why I asked the question.
So our organization can work with you in any state, and that was a difference. So sorry if I misclarified that earlier, but with the End of Life Option Act, that is confined to California state boundaries. And with Final Exit Network being a national organization, you can utilize the service here in California or in Hawaii or in Florida or something like that. That's what I was saying, brother. Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
have a couple questions.
Yes,
Do you
ma'am.
need to be a resident of California if you're visiting? Can you help people in other states if their state doesn't have the right to die?
That's an excellent question. So according to the End of Life Option Act, yes, you would have to be a resident of the state of California.
Okay. The other question is, how do you help people who have dementias, Alzheimer's, or cannot consent and cannot assist in their own death?
So those are 3 different questions, and let's address all 3 of them, okay?
Okay.
So if a person has Alzheimer's or dementia and is early enough, and Mike's giving a little feedback, I don't know if y'all can hear it, I can hear it over here. If a person has Alzheimer's or dementia and they're in the early stages, Final Exit Network can work with them. The key is they have to be mentally cognizant so they can give consent. So if you're like in the Dear Alice state. For those of you who watched the documentary Dear Alice, 20 years down the line of dementia, not able to remember or have a conversation in your day-to-day life, she wouldn't qualify. But if you're within the first 5, maybe even 10 years, where you know what's going on and you still have autonomy to make decisions for yourself, even though you might, all day might not be perfect, but for the most part you're okay, Final Exit Network would work with a person like that.
And so can that person opt to die at that moment, or can they say that in 10 years, when I am truly, completely demented, that I would like to do that?
Right, and that's that button not fitting.
Okay.
If you are conscious and able to make the decision with Alzheimer's, Final Exit Network would support you making that decision as long as you are conscious and able to make that decision. Thank you. Okay, and then we'll come up front after the question, Miller. I'll see you both.
I believe other ethnic groups and cultures have different approaches to end of life. In particular, I read once about the Inuit in northern Canada and how they deal with that. Could you make a comment about some of the ways that other cultures and ethnic groups deal with end of life?
Yeah, so when you talking about the present day, or you're talking about from like a historical perspective?
Both.
Okay, well, we can, did my mic's on? Okay. So we can talk about a few different ways. So for any of you biblical scholars in the room, because that's usually the debate that I have when I'm speaking to a group of Jewish folks in a synagogue. I actually did a presentation not far from here, and there were 100 doctors in the room, and half of them were rabbis at the same time. Very intimidating. Right? Didn't necessarily believe in the idea for end-of-life options. Thought God should control your death, whatever that means. But if you look in their book, there's a very interesting story about a man named King Saul and his assistant who was being taken over by their enemies. And King Saul ordered his assistant to both kill him and then kill himself so that the enemies wouldn't be able to take over their bodies and dehumane them. So I like to use that for any rabbis in the room to kind of knock them out with that. Okay, I'm gonna go through a couple more, but I do see y'all in front. We have 1, 2, 3. Another option is, with the Japanese culture, of course, is an honor system. So you would end your own life to honor yourself, so you wouldn't be. Sometimes it was a burden, but not all the time. A lot of times, if it was in war, I'm not going to let the enemy take over my body and disrespect my family name, or my family genes, or my family blood. So I will end my life so they can't say that they've created the Rowe name and gave suffering to the Rowes. So that's very interesting. Now, when you talk about Latino culture or black culture, I haven't seen as much in the sense of people taking this option. And when I have the conversation, if I'm at like a black church or I'm talking with some Catholics that happen to be Latino, I don't know if it's good or bad, but a lot of times they say they don't need help dying because they just died. It's just one day you're here, one day you're not. And you can be 48 years old and Uncle Joe just left the building. And that's pretty consistent among those two populations. And so it's not weird, I think, historically for people to end their life. But we have to remember that we live in America, and post-World War II, we've developed the best technology at the fastest rate the Earth has ever seen. And so we're in 1942, your arm gets blown off, you better put some fire to it right there at that moment to stop the bleeding or you're going to die. Well, now you can get shot in the arm and they can remove the bullet and stitch it up, or they can cut off your arm and give you a smooth prosthetic and make you shoot the basketball like Michael Jordan. Our technology is pretty impressive now. We can keep a body alive years and years and years without your brain being conscious, but we can have your heartbeat. What's your name again, sir? Herman. So unfortunately, Herman, if you're suffering and I'm your oncologist and I've had this conversation with oncologists, but you can't tell me to pull your plug, I can leave you plugged in 3, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. I can bill your insurance company and I can make money off of you every single day. Why would I want to help you end your life? I don't care if you're suffering if I can feed my family. And that's not all of our oncologists. I don't want y'all to say Jacie Rowe is against oncologists, right? The Oncologist Society write me letters of threats at home. But it does happen. And so I think with our technology, the way money is shaped around the medical facility, it changes the way we perceive death. Because again, if this was pre-World War II, and we were told Grandpa Joe is passing on, we'll just throw him a party and let him pass. It wasn't a problem. So let's hit the front, and then we'll slide around to the west side of the room. Right up, okay.
Actually, I am looking forward to kicking off.
Okay.
And I thought you would be giving free pills.
You know what?
But you might be interested in my experience.
Tell me,
I have
please.
experienced 2 near drownings. And I had absolutely no fear.
Excellent.
No fear.
Yeah.
The last drowning, near drowning, the only thing that bothered me was what Marge was going to do with my junk. I had absolutely no fear. Mother Nature takes care of this.
Yeah.
And just a few minutes, you're gone.
Yeah.
But I feel that I have no fear of dying, period.
I respect that. The interesting thing about that story, so as a child, my mom introduced this concept to me at 7 years old. So my dad was in the military, so since I can remember, I mean, Desert Storm started when I was 3 or 4 years old. So my dad was always gone for months at a time, and every time I asked my mom, where's my dad? He's protecting America by killing bad people. So I knew death at a young age. By the time I was 7, my mother and I would have these weekly meetings at a coffee shop. I say meetings, but she was always with me. She's my mother. But we would go to the coffee shop. She would order her coffee and have her cigarette. I would order a hot chocolate and a donut. And we would just talk for 2 or 3 hours at a time. It's probably why I like to talk today. And as she would talk to me, one day we were driving home, and she said, Jacie, if we get in a car accident or anything happens to me, and I'm not able to communicate with you, to teach you the way that I teach you every day, to walk you to school and work with you the way I'm working with you. She said, I want you to tell the doctors to end my life. Now, we didn't know about any laws around this. This was just a mother and her son having a very intimate moment. And I'm listening to my mom. I'm 7 years old. I'm sipping on my hot chocolate. And I'm like, you know what, Mom? If we ever get in a car accident or hit by a bus and I don't have autonomy of my body, or, you know, something happens to me where I can't speak and learn and enjoy and build and use this gift that you gave me when you birthed me into life to help make the world a better place, I want you to end my life too. I don't really care how you do it because I won't be conscious anyway. At 7 years old, I understood this concept. It just made sense. So when you say you have no fear, I can truly understand that because of my mother, I've never feared death. It was just part of the process. I might come back a butterfly. At least I'll be able to fly. Right? Energy cannot be created or destroyed anyway. It's only transferred from one entity to another for all of our science folks. Next question.
I'm hard at hearing even with my hearing aids, so you probably answered this question.
It's okay.
But if somebody wants to join a membership to your organization, I think it's called Final Exit Network. Mm-hmm. What is the fee to join?
It's $25 a year per person.
Oh, $25 a year.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I thought you said $2,500 a year.
No, sir. $25 a year. So it's just a friendly price that we have to operate as a nonprofit. And because our organization is 100% volunteer based, the money mainly goes to maintaining our website and publishing our newsletters.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I think we had a question in the front right before that one. Yeah. And then we'll go back to the next row.
Somebody said before that to pay the bill is not a problem for the procedure because once you are dead, there is no problem anymore. Right. I want to correct that. If you want to die with dignity, better pay the bill before you take the medicine.
Oh, you pay the bill. Oh, you hear it in the back? Okay. All right, we go to the back and then we'll go over here for questions.
Most of you are probably aware A lot of people used to commit suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. It was a popular and place for people to commit the suicide. Okay, obviously people didn't want to live, but then they started putting barriers and so on and so forth. Well, what I was just wondering, it's a silly question on my part, as they usually are, is what if they had people there that want to commit suicide and then say, here, I will take care of that, you don't have to jump, we'll give you this. Would that be legal?
I don't think that'll be legal. Yeah, I think you have to inquire on your own. So, and this raises a better point, even though I know you were being silly and I can appreciate it. Your doctors cannot initiate this conversation with you. That's key. If your doctors initiate this conversation with you and you feel any type of intimidation, you can actually call the police and have your doctors prosecuted for trying to make you commit suicide. This is about your autonomy. This is your right to express to your doctor how you're feeling and that you want options. If your doctor says, hey, Joe, you've been suffering for a while, let's go ahead and wrap it up, that's not legal at all. So from that perspective, a person couldn't just hand out pills to somebody trying to jump off the bridge either. So hopefully we'll have better options available for them. But thank you for that. Yes, sir.
Hi, Dana St.
Hello.
George. A long time ago, in the early 60s, I was in nursing. And at that time, it seemed like the thing that was done in the hospitals that I worked in was if somebody had a terminal illness, you never really talked openly about that.
Right.
It was always, oh, you're looking so great. Oh, you're going to get better.
Right.
Oh, we have another surgery that you can undergo that might help. And a lot of surgeries were done on terminally ill patients that did not improve their quality of life. And, you know, we saw a lot of death and dying. And I did want to say that there were two things that really shocked me. And that was that a very terminally ill cancer patient who had wasted away to about 70 pounds was kept alive with intravenous fluids for a couple of months on our floor. And it was really, really terrible. She had no family, nobody to protect her, nobody to say anything.
Exactly.
And finally, she died. And the other thing that really kind of shocked me was that some of the nurses were very strict about giving pain medications. So if there's an order for a certain number of cc's of morphine or whatever they were giving, and they would not go beyond that, even though it was not adequate to keep the pain at bay. And there were patients that were suffering, and they would say, please, please, please help me, please give me more morphine, and they would not. But also there were nurses that would draw up a little extra morphine and try to extend the coverage. But it was the whole attitude was, we can't talk about death, we can't talk about it openly and plan for it.
Exactly. And that, sadly, that culture still permeates some parts of our state today, where, like when I asked about the pink sheet earlier, most people didn't even know what it was, right? It's because of the doctors who knows all of this information are not sharing this information. And I've argued with many doctors face to face and say, if you all were doing your job, I wouldn't exist. I don't have a PhD in the medical field. I'm a political science major. I politically organize. I run campaigns. Like, you want to run for governor? I can win your campaign. If you want to change the law, I can do that. If you want to run for city council, I can do that. Why am I educating on death with dignity? Because the doctors are afraid to. And what's my example of that? UCLA met with Dr. Cherry, Robert Cherry, if you want to look him up and call him and ask him to do better. Met with him in February of this year. Said, Dr. Cherry, you know we just passed the End of Life Option Act a couple years ago. What are you doing? UCLA is a state school. You all have to support it. He says, yeah, JC, I know all about it. We're following you. We just held a medical conference. Talk to my assistant in the department, and they'll tell you about the medical conference we held. It was great. Well, Dr. Cherry, why don't you tell me about it? Well, I wasn't there, but it was great. Okay, thank you. Let's talk to your assistant. Tell me about this medical conference that you had. Oh, yeah, it was all day, Saturday and Sunday. We invited 300 doctors and nurses and staff and volunteers for the hospital. We invited everybody. That's amazing. You have any pictures? How many people showed up? Well, we had 4 doctors show up, but they're really committed doctors, and they really, really believe in the cause. UCLA Medical School only had 4 doctors attend the medical conference on death with dignity. How many nurses you have show up? About a dozen. There's less than 20 people at your medical conference concerning death with dignity? How are you addressing this with the community? Who's spreading the information? You can't even spread the information within your facility. So, I don't expect you all to know a whole lot about this issue. Unfortunately, that's why I have to give these speeches. That's why I hope you would tell your friends about them. This organization, Final Exit and the End of Life Option Act, so that we can work together to make sure people have a peace of mind. They don't have to go years and years and years suffering, even if they have Alzheimer's. Because depending on when we catch it, there's still options available. Arthur, did you have a question?
Question here.
Okay, awesome.
I'm a long time member of Kaiser, and it seemed to me my doctor did give me an advanced directive form.
Excellent.
And then I think it's been a little while since I've looked at those papers, but it seems to me there were some things in there where I indicated I don't want to live under certain conditions. Is an advanced directive in any way different from what you've been talking about?
It is. The advanced directive is very similar to the 5 wishes. So the 5 wishes was just created by a nonprofit, where the advanced directive, I think, was put forth by Kaiser in the original form in like the 1960s. So the advanced directive is a good form. I mean, 5 wishes, advanced directive, you can use both. One is just more personal than the other. But the doctors would recognize the advanced directive a lot quicker. You can send that to them immediately. It's on their file and it stays with them. Now, another benefit, randomly, because I appreciate you reminding me of the advanced directive, is that when you join our organization, we actually put you on the United States Registry for your will. And that's huge, because I think it costs $300 to register on your own, but just by paying the $25 when you join, you automatically are on the United States Registry. So any hospital or hospice medical staff can access your will once you're in your last days and make sure that your wishes are being fulfilled. And so with this registry, it's going to have your actual will, it'll have any power of attorneys that you've created, it'll have your 5 wishes, your advance directive, it'll have your pulse with the pink sheet, and your do not resuscitate, all on the registry. And again, just for joining our organization. That's our part in making sure that you're covered wherever you are. That's very important for us as an organization. We're advocates.
That's a quick follow-up.
Please.
Kaiser provides each member who wishes a thumb drive and medical records.
That's correct.
Thanks. Do you know whether that is included, the advanced directive information is included on that thumb drive?
It is. It is. Now, thank you for bringing that up. Kaiser do provide a thumb drive with all of these documents as well. That's why I got a lot of them for my PDFs that I email out. So it makes it easier. And their advanced directives have evolved a lot over the last 50 years, too. So if you have one from the 80s, I think it's actually the most detailed. You're shaking your head like you remember. No, I didn't. Oh, that's all good. But I think that's the most detailed. But if you get one from 2016 to 2017 and you have the other forms, you're still covered. You should be okay. Back over here.
Yeah, you mentioned the idea of methods and things that you can order off of Amazon.com to actually do it. Can you talk a little bit about what's available?
Yeah, so through the inert gas method, that they will, when you work with our organization, we will educate you on like the specific items you need. Now, unfortunately, I've never sat with the person utilizing this method, so I couldn't tell you how big the machine is or what all the moving parts are. The closest I've gotten to is through Derek Humphrey's book, Final Exit, in which he explains it in more detail if you want to look at it. I think he even has a 3D picture diagram in his book. And you can download the PDF of his book on the internet too. It's free. So Derek Humphrey is the name I've said.
Can you say that name?
Derek Humphrey,
Starts with a
D-E-R-E-K, and then Humphrey is H-U-M-P-H-R-E-Y. And so I definitely encourage you to Google him. That our organization is named after his book. But through the inert gas method, we'll teach a person how to obtain the supplies for that method specifically. So, get you in here in a second.
Seems like all you would need for this inert gas method is an oxygen mask and a cylinder of nitrogen.
Can I plead the fifth on that one? Is that okay? Right here.
I think maybe there was a little bit of miscommunication. It's Arthur Jackson. My suspicion here is probably 90, if not more, % of the people sitting in this room have End-of-Life Options Act, which their hospitals, if they get in a bad situation, what needs to happen. So it seemed to me maybe you misunderstood. You had the feeling we never heard of these possibilities before. Or maybe I misunderstood what you were saying when you brought up particular forms and we didn't all raise our hands, that we were like ignorant of the whole thing.
No, I wasn't saying it like that. I was saying that doctors aren't taking the time or the responsibility to educate people, period, in California. And that's not just this organization. Like I give, this is probably my 374th speech in the last 3 years on this issue, right? I've never walked into a room where 100% of the audience were like, oh yeah, the pink sheet, the DNR, 5 wishes. Oh, I have, there's never, from San Diego to Trinity County. So please forgive me if I came across with any innuendos of saying ignorance. It's not on that. It was more so my subtle attack on the doctors, okay?
It's kind of confusing because you kind of implied that doctors shouldn't bring up the subject, but now you're saying that they're at fault because they're not educating people. So how do you explain that?
Yeah, I will definitely. So doctors should give you all of your options according to 2007, meaning when you go to the hospital and you're not well and you happen to have a terminal illness, they can say, there's several options on the table, would you like me to explore them with you? Very simply, right? They cannot say, Elaine, you've had cancer for about 8 months, I think you gotta go. There's a difference, right? If a doctor says, there's some knowledge that I have that I'd like to share with you, we can have that conversation. Now that's equal on all forms, right? So if there's a traditional medication, an experimental medication, maybe a UC Stanford special grant-funded medication, I want to know those options, just like I want to know about palliative care, palliative sedation, refusal for food and water, right? I want to know all my options. And so I expect doctors to not only learn about the End-of-Life Option Act, but when they're already presenting this conversation, saying, hey, you do have options for medication and or something more, then as a person or a client, you can go to your doctor and say, well, tell me all my options, and then they can go into more details about the one you choose, right? But when we have doctors that won't even get other doctors to show up to their medical conferences on this subject, how can they ever have a conversation with you? Even if you say, what are my options, they're never going to bring up the End-of-Life Option Act because they don't know about it, or they're choosing not to be educated about it. Does that make sense? So I'm glad to clear that up.
Well, Q&A's finished. Let's give Jacie a big hand.
I'll be here around for a little bit. Thank you. Blessings. Thank you.